I was grabbing lunch the other day and inevitably real estate came up. One of the questions that was asked me was, hey, is there going to be a foreclosure boom in the near future here? And maybe. So not likely. We'll go ahead and answer that question and everything that I had to say about the foreclosure boom that may or may not be materializing. Before we get started though, my name is Jamin. I'm a realtor in South Central Alaska with Keller Williams. My mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family. And today we're going to be talking about the foreclosure boom that may or may not be happening here in South Central Alaska. Before we get started though, give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and let's go and jump into today's video. So a couple of years ago, when everybody was convinced there was going to be this big foreclosure explosion, and this was going to be another 2008, 2009, where investors were going to be able to just swoop in, take advantage of everything. Everyone was saying that was going to happen. I was one of the very few people publicly saying, at least in this space up here, that is not likely to be happening because what we see here in South Central Alaska, there's a much better equity position than what we have in the lower 48. And yes, we have a lot of properties that are in forbearance. It's not the same thing as them necessarily being in trouble or them having to foreclose on their property. Not only that, because the appreciation went up so aggressively over the course of that couple of years, then it was next to impossible to know if a property was in distress or not, just because anything that was going on in the market, as long as it was priced about to where it needed to be, was getting attention, was probably going to be able to sell. So it was very difficult to tell exactly if that was going to happen or not. Now, everybody at the time, all the investors, and I took some flack from people that were telling me I just didn't know what I was talking about, that this for sure was going to happen. A lot of those investors stayed on the sidelines just waiting for this foreclosure crash to happen, just wishing ill on their fellow man, and it didn't happen. And instead, they ended up losing out on the historically low interest rates that they could have been taken advantage of had they really jumped into it. But instead, they were waiting for this big foreclosure crash to happen. Now, looking forward though, it didn't happen the past couple of years. Could it happen in the near future? I'm not exactly sure what the logic is behind this thought process right now. I'm not sure why we would see it now versus a couple of years ago, why we would see it now instead of back then. But what we're seeing in the stats is usually in Alaska across the entire board, the number of properties that actually sell that were in foreclosed status is about 250. High watermark was back in 2016 when 262 properties sold for the entire state that were in foreclosure. Now, what we see is back in 2020, the number of properties that sold in foreclosure, I think that was actually about 230. So, even though that the moratorium in there, some of them were still going to foreclosure. The year after that, it was 118. And this year to date, right at the end of September, it is 50, with only 14 properties in foreclosure status still on the market. So it seems pretty unlikely that we're going to be seeing any foreclosure explosion anytime in the near future, just based off of what we can see here in the stats. Now, the thing that I am finding pretty interesting looking at this is you're still going to have people that are on the sidelines just waiting for this to happen, wishing that it's going to happen so they can just swoop in and do exactly what they did, or do exactly what the opportunists did back in 2009, 2008. And yeah, that's not likely to happen because the dynamics of what we're actually seeing on the ground couldn't be any more different than what we had back then. Back then, there were too many options available and they were all foreclosed on, and there was a terrible equity position, and now it's the exact opposite issue. There's too few properties that are available, and everyone's got a pretty good equity position because they've really cinched down the lending requirements in order for people to get homes. So even if you did have to sell a property at foreclosure and it was a distressed, you probably wouldn't have to foreclose on it just because the equity has gone up so drastically. To give you an idea, average sold price in the Mat-Su Valley went from approximately 300, I think it was about 300 flat a couple of years ago, to about 385 right now. So you can see that that's going to do a lot of things for the value of your property, even if you're in some kind of a distressed situation. And that's just the Matsu Valley. It can be even more pronounced if we're looking at places over in Anchorage or Eagle River. Now, before we continue, do make sure that, let's just take a break real quick here. If you're considering getting your property on the market in the near future, then certainly do feel free to get a copy of my seller guide for those of you who are considering doing that. And just go to my website. A link for that is going to be in the description section down below. Just make sure you put seller guide in the comments section so I know what to send you once you've registered. Now, let's go and finish today's video. Now, for those of you who are investors, and the foreclosure explosion that everyone was promised is probably not going to happen. So what's your next best opportunity? Because there's opportunities in every market, and the question is just whether or not you can find it. Well, some of the biggest opportunities that I've seen recently is that a lot of properties are actually under rented right now. And how this happens is you get a lot of private landlords. They're just happy to not have to pay a whole lot of attention to their income rental properties. So they're not really increasing the rate on their property up to the current market value for the rental property that they currently have. So that's perfectly fine if you're a landlord. It starts to become an issue if you're like $100, $200, $300 under the market value for what you could be getting on each unit for your fourplex. You start to see how that becomes a big issue. So you want to find some of these properties that are priced to where they need to be and are under rented. Because once you find that, like that's a great opportunity. Another big opportunity for investors right now is to go buy properties in areas that we've seen are appreciating historically at a really good rate. Now, if you want to talk about where some of those areas are right now, I'd be more than happy to discuss that with you. But what we are seeing is there are certain areas that are appreciating quicker than other areas. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And some of them are going to be within our control on the ground here. And some of them are just going to be what the demographic trends are for the area as far as people moving from one direction or the other. So go buying something that's in that area, hang on to it, make sure that it cash flows ahead of time. Because I'm telling you, if you buy something just purely based off of the anticipation for it to appreciate, but it doesn't stand on its own 2 feet as a cash flowing property, then that's going to come back to bite you. And one other thing I would mention, don't expect the current rental amounts that we're getting on properties to maintain over the long term. As we've seen here in Alaska, rental prices go up, they go down. And so if you're barely scraping by right now at the high rates that we have at the moment with the property, then that's not a great indicator going into the future. There's no guarantee it's going to stay that way moving into the future. Now, this next point I know is not going to be very popular because there are a lot of people out there touting the philosophy of, oh, I should be able to just have nothing down and I should be able to just spend, other people's money. I just need to be able to go in there and just get to work, and that's how I'm going to build wealth. Well, you can do that, and I can help with that, but my personal investment strategy is save up money, have cash ready to go, because that gives you so many more opportunities for what you can do and the flexibility you have to do it than if you have to work with a ton of other strings attached, because that's all it is when you're having to use other people's money. Other people suddenly start getting a much bigger say in what you do than you do, and that's not great. That's your decision if you want to do that. I'm just telling you that will start wearing on you eventually, and it's very hard to actually do something long term if you are just constantly having to use other people's money. So save up cash. Whatever it is you need to do, take a second job. If you're serious about investing, then get the cash that you need to in order to be able to do this stuff, because it is going to make the process a whole lot more profitable for you really in the long run, because you get more opportunities if you have more cash and you have it quicker than other people. And last but not least, go and find properties that allow you to do some pretty creative stuff as far as the zoning goes. So a lot of people don't really pay attention to the zoning as much in this area on what they can do with that specific property that they're purchasing. Now, this is going to be more applicable to places like Anchorage or Eagle River. You can certainly find it in other places like Wasilla as well, but a lot of places in Wasilla I've known are really not zoned. So you really want to pay attention to what's going on as far as the zoning offices go, to get a sense if something is going to be rezoned into something else. So we might be using it as just a rental income property right now, but they're planning on doing some zoning in the near future that allows it to be used as a commercial space. or be used as a business, or, fill in the blank, whatever else you want it to be used for. Something like that is going to change how you can use the property, and depending on what you want to use it for, can really increase it or decrease its value. So pay attention to that zoning. So I hope this has been useful. I hope I didn't ruin too many people's days by saying I'm not really expecting a foreclosure crisis anytime soon. I'm sorry, investors, you're going to have to be a little bit more creative instead of just sitting around wishing for doom and gloom and destruction on your fellow man. I sure hope this has been useful. Like I said, give this video a like and we'll see you next time.